surface of patriotism, slogans, and national pride, something far more unsettling is brewing. In quiet corners of the country, lawmakers are drafting bold proposals, governors are hinting at foreign alliances, and polls reveal something shocking. Millions of Americans are warming up to the idea of secession, but here's the twist. Some of them aren't just looking to break away. They're looking north. Canada isn't just a neighbor anymore. It's being whispered about as a possible new partner. Is this just political theater, or are real escape plans already in motion? Let's find out. Number 10, Alaska, the cold exit. Alaska has always been the outsider, a vast, frozen frontier that often feels more like its own country than a U.S. state. But recently, that distance has become more than just geographical. With sky-high energy costs, crumbling infrastructure, and mounting frustration over federal interference, Alaska's independence streak is reaching a boiling point. Many residents feel Washington takes more than it gives, leaving the state isolated and misunderstood. Economically, Alaska's dependence on oil exports gives it a unique leverage. But when federal restrictions and environmental policies start threatening those lifelines, that leverage starts to feel more like a leash. Add in the fact that Alaskans frequently clash with agencies like the EPA and Department of the Interior, and you've got a recipe for rebellion. And while talk of independence was once reserved for bumper stickers and bar chatter, today it's showing up in online forums, community groups, and local debates. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Canada. And Alaska already has strong economic and defense ties with Yukon and British Columbia. Joint tourism efforts, cross-border trade, and even environmental coordination make the connection more real than symbolic. Some even argue that Alaska would thrive better under Canadian governance, especially when it comes to energy policy and rural development. So, is Alaska serious? Maybe. While no formal secession plan is in motion, the mood is shifting. Independence isn't just a punchline anymore, it's becoming a plan B. And if frustration continues to build, especially with rising inflation and lagging infrastructure investments, Alaska might just decide it's had enough of being the forgotten frontier. Number 9, Texas, Lone Star Nation 2.0. Texas isn't just angry, it's actively preparing. Long known for its fierce independence, the Lone Star State is seeing a sharp rise in nationalist sentiment that's no longer confined to the political fringes. Movements like the Texas Nationalist Movement claim thousands of active supporters across nearly every major county. And what was once a fringe idea has now made its way into the legislative arena, with a non-binding vote on independence reportedly on the table for later this year. Economically, Texas has the numbers to stand on its own. It boasts a GDP larger than most countries, controls its own power grid, and is home to massive oil and energy sectors. Supporters of secession argue that Texas doesn't just want independence, it could actually survive and thrive with it. And then there's the culture, a rugged, deeply rooted Texan identity that's clashing more and more with federal policies on immigration, education, and border security. The federal government's response to ongoing border issues has only fanned the flames. Many Texans see Washington as out of touch, more of a problem than a solution. That's why more residents, young and old, conservative, and even some libertarian-leaning liberals, are starting to believe that going it alone might be the best path forward. But here's the twist. Some within Texas have floated ideas of partnering with energy-rich economies. And yes, Canada has quietly entered those conversations, at least in speculative circles. Could it be possible that Texas, with its oil-heavy economy, finds a kindred spirit in Canada's Alberta? We're not there yet, but Texas isn't bluffing. The machinery of separation is slowly turning. But if Texas is loud, the next state is whispering, and it might be even closer to leaving. Number 8, California ready to go global. California isn't just a state, it's a global powerhouse. With an economy that ranks 5th largest in the world, a booming tech industry, and unmatched cultural influence, California has more in common with entire countries than with most U.S. states. And lately, the tension between Sacramento and Washington has reached a breaking point. From climate policy to gun control, immigration laws to healthcare mandates, California's progressive agenda is in constant collision with federal authority. But here's where things move from conflict to confrontation. Cal Exit, the organized movement pushing for California's independence, has gained surprising traction. Rallies have been held, petitions signed, and in 2024, activists even submitted a revised independence proposal for review by state lawmakers. While it hasn't yet reached the ballot, the movement has gone from online chatter to real political organizing. What makes California's case unique is its deep alignment with Canada. British Columbia and California have already partnered on climate change, clean energy, and wildfire response. The two share not only environmental concerns, but also a similar social outlook, progressive values, and economic innovation. In many ways, California already behaves more like a Canadian province than a traditional U.S. state. The question is no longer, could California survive on its own? It's how long until enough people believe it should. Younger voters in particular are growing and disillusioned with federal dysfunction and increasingly open to bold alternatives. For them, a future outside the U.S. or even aligned with a country like Canada isn't radical, it's practical. California may not be ready to leave just yet, but the exit signs are blinking. The wildfires may be seasonal, but the desire to break free is permanent. From wildfires to wild ideas. What about the Empire State? Number 7. New York. Symbolism turns serious. New York may be the beating heart of American capitalism, but politically it's feeling more disconnected from Washington than ever before. The divide between liberal state leadership and increasingly conservative federal agendas has turned from irritation into something far more dangerous. Alienation, healthcare, gun laws, immigration. On every major issue, New York seems to be pulling away, not leaning in. In early 2025, something shocking happened. State Senator Liz Krueger openly suggested that if the U.S. continues to spiral politically, New York and neighboring states should consider joining Canada. While many dismissed it as symbolic, insiders know statements like, that don't happen by accident, especially not in Albany. And that proposal didn't come out of nowhere. It came on the heels of rising public frustration, widening economic divides, and an increasing belief that New York's goals no longer align with the rest of the country. There's also a cultural layer at play. New York City sees itself less as part of Middle America and more as an international capital, one that shares more values with Toronto or Montreal than rural Texas or Kansas. Trade, tourism, tech, and finance already tie the Empire State to Canada's largest cities. Could those links one day become the foundation for something bigger? Polls show a growing curiosity among residents, not just about independence, but about viable alternatives. And while New York hasn't yet launched a formal secession movement, the whispers are no longer just from activists. They're coming from lawmakers, policy experts, and everyday people. Is New York really planning a departure? Not yet. But if things continue to unravel politically, it might not be as far-fetched as it sounds. That wasn't just talk. The next state actually tried to change the Constitution. Number 6. Oklahoma, the unexpected rebel. At first glance, Oklahoma seems like the last place you'd expect to hear secession talk. A deep red conservative stronghold, far from any international border. But behind the patriotic facade lies a growing undercurrent of frustration, and it's starting to spill into the mainstream. Surprisingly, Oklahoma ranks high in national secession polls, even beating out several liberal states. And the question is, why? The answer starts in rural America. Farmers and small-town residents across Oklahoma feel increasingly abandoned by Washington. Whether it's strict environmental regulations, healthcare mandates, or education funding that doesn't reflect local needs, many believe federal policy is more of a burden than a benefit. That resentment has only deepened in recent years. And in Oklahoma's case, it's igniting something bigger. Online forums and local groups are openly discussing autonomy, state sovereignty, and even secession. These aren't fringe conspiracy corners. They're growing communities with thousands of members. Some are even proposing economic models where Oklahoma could align itself more closely with Western Canada, particularly Alberta and Saskatchewan. Why? Because their economies are strikingly similar, fueled by oil, gas, and agriculture. It's not just geography that creates a bond, it's industry, culture, and a shared belief in self-reliance. Even within the state, internal divisions are becoming hard to ignore. Urban areas like Oklahoma City and Tulsa lean increasingly modern and progressive, while rural counties are digging in harder on tradition. That tug of war is tearing at the seams of the state's identity. Oklahoma isn't drafting any independence papers just yet, but the chatter is growing louder, and the belief that Washington no longer represents real Oklahomans is spreading fast. When quiet frustration turns into organized dialogue, change isn't far behind. If Oklahoma's thinking about it, wait until you hear about New England. Number 5. New Hampshire. Shock out for secession. New Hampshire has always marched to the beat of its own drum. The state motto, live free or die, isn't just a slogan, it's a philosophy. But in 2024, that independent spirit took a dramatic turn when a proposed constitutional amendment to secede from the United States was brought to the state legislature. And here's the kicker. 33 lawmakers voted in favor. That's not symbolic. That's serious. While the amendment didn't pass, it sent shockwaves across the country. What would make a group of elected officials in a quiet New England state seriously consider breaking ties with the Union? The answer lies in New Hampshire's libertarian roots and a growing sense that Washington is overreaching. Federal involvement in education, healthcare, gun laws, and taxation has sparked growing resentment among residents who feel their local autonomy is being eroded. Then there's geography. New Hampshire shares not only a border with Canada, but also increasing cultural and economic ties. The French language is still common in parts of the state. Tourism from Quebec pours in every year. And over the past decade, quiet trade relationships with Canadian businesses have only strengthened. These aren't just neighborly exchanges, they're forming real connections. What makes New Hampshire unique is its lack of fear in challenging the system. Unlike bigger states where secession talk is often dismissed as political theater, here it's entered mainstream political dialogue. Town halls, local debates, and media outlets are now openly discussing the what-if scenario, something unthinkable just a few years ago. New Hampshire isn't planning to leave tomorrow, but it has made one thing clear. The idea is no longer unthinkable. And if the federal government continues to drift from local values, the Granite State might just make the first crack in the foundation. But geography isn't the only reason to break away. Number 4. Minnesota's fume. Unity in a frustration, Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes, and now 10,000 doubts about America's direction. What makes this state's story unique isn't just the growing dissatisfaction with Washington, it's that both Republicans and Democrats here are beginning to agree on one thing. Something's deeply broken. In an era where bipartisan agreement is nearly extinct, secession sentiment in Minnesota has support across the aisle, and that's not a fluke. That's a warning. Unlike flashier states, Minnesota isn't making headlines with protests or petitions, but what it lacks in noise, it makes up for in quiet determination. Public trust in federal institutions is at a historic low. From rural farmers to urban professionals, many Minnesotans feel like they're caught in the middle of a national identity crisis, with no one in Washington truly listening. But here's where things start to shift north. Minnesota shares one of the longest freshwater borders with Canada, linked by Lake Superior in the Boundary Waters. Canadian radio stations are a daily staple in towns like International Falls. Cross-border trade with Manitoba and Ontario brings in billions. These aren't just casual ties, they're deep, routine, and quietly binding. And then there's culture. When it comes to healthcare, environmental policy, and labor protections, many Minnesotans feel more aligned with Ottawa than with DC. Talk of annexation by Canada, once a running joke, is now met with serious nods and thoughtful discussion. In universities, town halls, and even local governments, the what-if scenario is no longer off limits. Minnesota might still be waving the stars and stripes, but behind the scenes, many are circling their options. And when both sides of the political aisle start agreeing that maybe there's a better fit elsewhere, it's not just frustration anymore. It's momentum. The middle of America is splitting in more ways than one. Number 3, Illinois divide within the state. Illinois isn't just battling federal dysfunction, it's battling itself. The state is caught in a political civil war, with Chicago on one side and much of downstate Illinois on the other. For years, rural counties have felt overshadowed, outvoted, and outright ignored by the political machine centered in the Windy City. And now that resentment is taking formal shape. More than 30 counties have passed resolutions calling for Chicago to be separated from the rest of the state. To some, this may sound like political theater, but to many residents outside Chicago, it's a desperate call for autonomy. They believe Chicago dominates every election, controls the purse strings, and imposes urban policies on communities that have completely different values. But the conversation doesn't stop at kicking out a city. Some are starting to ask a bigger question. If Illinois no longer works as one state, does it still work as part of one country? And that's where Canada enters the picture. Despite not sharing a land border, Illinois has strong economic ties with Canada through the Great Lakes Trade Corridor. Exports to Ontario and Manitoba include agriculture, manufacturing equipment, and raw materials. Shared concerns like environmental protection, freshwater management, and infrastructure modernization have led to growing collaboration between the two regions. For rural Illinoisans frustrated with Washington and with their own state government, the idea of aligning with a system that supports agriculture, offers universal health care and decentralized governance is more appealing than ever. It's still early. There are no formal secession movements targeting Canada, but the growing fractures inside Illinois, paired with a loss of trust in federal leadership, are paving the way for deeper questions about loyalty, identity, and the future. And now the Northeast joins the conversation. Number two, Connecticut, the quiet elite. Connecticut doesn't make much noise, but when it moves, people notice. Known for its wealth, education, and progressive values, this small but powerful state is starting to appear in a surprising conversation: secession. And it's not coming from conspiracy theorists. It was named directly in a 2025 proposal by New York State Senator Liz Krueger, who suggested that if the U.S. continues to unravel, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont should consider joining Canada. Why Connecticut? Because beneath its polished surface, frustration is mounting. Residents are tired of seeing their progressive values on healthcare, education, gun reform, and environmental policy constantly blocked or reversed by Washington. While federal leadership swings wildly between extremes, Connecticut's path has remained clear and more aligned with Canada's Atlantic provinces than with much of the American heartland. Though there's no formal independence movement, the online chatter is growing. Political forums, college debate circuits, and even private think tanks have begun quietly discussing what an East Coast realignment might look like. Could a cluster of northeastern states form their own bloc, or even join a neighbor that already shares their ideals? The idea sounds wild until you realize how much Connecticut already shares with Canada. From cross-border financial partnerships to climate policy and public health care comparisons, the common ground is deeper than most realize. And in a state with some of the highest per capita income and education levels in the U.S., these conversations don't just reflect frustration, they reflect calculation. For now, the discussions are quiet, strategic, intellectual, but if things in Washington continue to spiral, don't be surprised if Connecticut steps forward not with noise, but with a plan. And finally, the wild card no one saw coming. Number one, New Jersey, the bipartisan breakpoint. New Jersey may be small in size, but it carries enormous weight economically, politically, and symbolically. That's why recent polling out of the Garden State sent shockwaves through political circles. Both Republicans and Democrats are showing nearly equal support for secession. In one of the most politically divided eras in U.S. history, that kind of bipartisan agreement is almost unheard of. And when both sides start whispering the same radical idea, you know something serious is brewing. Residents are fed up. Sky-high property taxes, crumbling public transit, and a sense that the state's political machine no longer serves the people have created a deep, festering distrust. But unlike more rural states, New Jersey isn't just angry, it's influential. With a dense population, strategic location, and a diverse, robust economy, it holds the kind of leverage that makes Washington nervous. And then there's the quiet pull of Canada. New Jersey's progressive values on healthcare, labor protections, and environmental policy mirror those of Canadian provinces like Ontario and Nova Scotia. Economically, the state's ports, pharmaceutical industry, and tech sector already have cross-border connections. Some experts say that if Jersey ever seriously entertained the idea of breaking away, it wouldn't be alone. It would be leading a movement. There's no formal declaration, no statewide vote on the table, but the murmurs are growing louder. And if a state like New Jersey, wealthy, connected, and centrally located, is done waiting on federal reform, what message does that send to the rest of the country? The map of America may be shifting, quietly, but powerfully. Which way do you think might make the first move? Drop your thoughts in the comments on We Read Every One. And if this made you think, check out our last video for another truth few are talking about. Support our work by hitting subscribe. It's just one click, but it means the world to us.